This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in New Zealand. You can email us at contact@aeanz.org.
And it's the first Friday of the month, so we've got the pleasure of a speaker's story, and our speaker tonight is Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill and I'm an addictive eater.
Hi, Jill.
I didn't remember. In fact, I've been, I don't know, for some reason quite anxious about sharing tonight. I wasn't quite sure where to start, so this afternoon I thought I'd just listen to a tape that might give me some inspiration. And the speaker was talking about letting go, and he said, letting go in the program means letting go of old ideas, which basically means letting go of ego. And it was just that simple. And it just got me thinking about, how much my life has been governed by old ideas. And I remember when I first went to AA, there was a woman who always used to say, if I was so wrong about my drinking, maybe I was wrong about everything else. She used to say this over and over every time I heard her. And it had quite an impact on me. And, as I was thinking about speaking tonight, I just thought particularly how my eating was just totally governed by old ideas. I have memories of eating that go back to when I was 2 or 3 years old, stealing food and hiding food. And growing up, it's not quite the right word to describe my experiences, but as I went through, childhood and teenage years, I had that very clear idea that my eating was caused by my awful parents, the awful town I grew up in, my awful brother and sister, the awful school I went to, the awful country I lived in. It was absolutely, I learned blame at such a young age. Everything was everyone else's fault, and certainly the food was no exception to that. And I remember sort of as I got a bit older, I was going to say reading books like Fat as a Feminist Issue, but that book, I'm not sure whether it still sits on my bookshelf. It did for a very long time, and I've still never read it, I know that. But I didn't need to, because the name gave me the excuse. Again, it was just all the fault of my upbringing and everything else. And, that's how I live my life, just that refusal to take responsibility for anything. And I remember when I first came into the program, that shock of, it took me a while to have any perception of what the steps are about, but when I finally did, that shock of having to take responsibility for yourself, because I very comfortably lived with everything being everyone else's fault. And I've often said, there's nothing in this program that ever would have occurred to me as being a good idea. I really was behaved like a spoiled little brat. And I remember my first sponsor used to say things, and I'd think, God, you sound just like my mother. This is my much maligned mother who'd never done a thing for me. And I eventually realised, after I had thought to myself many times, you sound just like my mother, it just occurred to me that my mother had probably tried to teach me all the sorts of things we learn in this program, and I just didn't listen. I didn't listen to anyone. I remember particularly in my, childhood and when I was at school, just charging through life and having no comprehension of why anything was like it was, why other people had friends and I didn't seem to, how other people made friends. It was just all, life was just all totally baffling to me. And, I believe now absolutely that I was born an addict, and just that incapacity to learn from anything anyone said or did, or even from my own experiences. I don't think I ever learned from anything. And, I spent my whole life being miserable and, the eating sort of, I guess it sort of covered everything up. I don't for a moment think that's why I ate. I'm really, really clear that the only reason I ate was that I was an addict. And I believe that if I had come from a family that was like Pollyanna's family, whatever Pollyanna's family's like, but I'm sure it was very happy, I would have invented reasons to be miserable. It was just in me to be miserable and unhappy, and so I ate, and I don't think eating made me happy. It just, I don't know what it did anyway. I don't really think in a way it matters what it did, but it was certainly, I just had to eat. And I remember sort of going into teenage years and becoming more body conscious and wanting to have boyfriends and things like that, and just, seeing myself as this fat blob, and just hating myself, and just having no ability to control my eating. And, and then I remember even more leaving home, and, the eating really took off. And I can remember, going home after my first term at university, and I think I'd probably put on 2 or 3 stone in that first term, just it was just insane. That's how it was, And then, drinking was very much part of my story. I have no doubts whatsoever about addiction swapping from one thing to another, and it was a very big part of my history, the swapping between food and alcohol. And I always had this illusion that I could lose weight whenever I liked, because whenever I got into drinking, I would lose weight and I'd forget about eating, and then I'd lose my drinking buddies for one reason or another, and I'd go back to eating, and my weight just went backwards and forwards like a yo-yo. And yeah, I mean that old idea that I had control over my eating, it fooled me for a lot of years. And particularly, I came to AA before I came to an eating fellowship, and I remember particularly when I stopped eating, and particularly even more so when I stopped smoking, I just ballooned, and my eating had always been there as a problem all my life, and suddenly I didn't have any other substances, and it got really out of control. And that's when I first started going to a 12-step program for food addiction, and I spent quite a few years, and I've seen people here, who will come to a meeting, maybe 2 or 3 meetings, and then go away again for 6 months and come again. And I was like that for, I don't know, maybe a period of about 4 years, and I look back on that and I think how awful it was. And, I had no willingness to stop eating, but I wanted it to happen, I had no willingness to do anything about it, and I'd come to a few meetings, and then I'd feel a bit better, and I'd go away, and about 6 months later I'd start to feel terrible, so I'd drag myself back to a meeting and think, oh my God, they're still talking about that again, and I'd go away again, and I look back on that time and what a dreadful, miserable time it was. And during all this, I had moved to Christchurch, and after probably 2 or 3 years here, I decided I'd give the program one last chance to prove itself to me as I saw it. And I came to a meeting here, and I've often shared this, to see it was the first time I'd seen people in recovery from food addiction, and it just amazed me. I mean, I'd been to meetings, it may be that I just hadn't seen it, but certainly I saw it at this meeting, and people were calm, and there was nothing calm about my life. On the outside it might have looked all right, but inside I was this raging tornado all the time, and I hated myself, I hated everybody else, I was very angry. I was always, I used to wake up every morning and pray to be calm and peaceful, and I'd get out the door and start yelling at people, and it was just horrible. It wasn't just the food, it was absolutely the way I was as a person. And I remember going to this meeting here, and a lot of people who were at that meeting, at this meeting tonight, quite a few, at least half a dozen. That was a long time ago, and I just remember that calmness about them. I actually cannot remember anything anyone said. I remember all these smiling faces in the front row. I didn't appreciate those. Go away and stop grinning at me. But, I do remember just that peace and calm about them. And I woke up every morning hating the world, and I went to bed at night every night hating the world. And I could just tell, I don't think it was what they said, it was just their manner. I could just tell that they didn't live like that they didn't go out every night and every day and yell at people, that they didn't spend, go into the supermarket and have to grab every new thing that was going. And that wasn't the end of my eating, but it absolutely was the first time I had really had hope around the food. And I don't know, I think hope is an amazing word. It just sort of, it's a little word, and say, oh, I hope you have a nice day, that sort of thing. It doesn't seem to mean anything. And yet to me, it was the biggest thing in the world to wait, to leave that meeting and just think maybe there's hope for me. And it, in the past have been, if those stupid people can do it, so can I. It wasn't like that at all. It was just, maybe this, it was almost sort of in the war. It was maybe this could work for me. And, you might think that could have been the end of my eating, but it absolutely wasn't. I got a food plan and got a sponsor. I tried to get them in that order, but that didn't work. I remember going up to somebody and saying, would you give me a food plan? And, she just said, are you looking for a sponsor? And I thought, hell no. And I was too frightened to say that. Yes. And, I started doing all the things in this program. I thought the food plan was wonderful. It was all I really wanted. And, somewhere along the line, that was my attitude. I suppose I just wanted to be thin, at that point. Also I was aware of the obsession. I wanted to get rid of the obsession, but it was all about what I wanted. It wasn't, I had no comprehension. I mean, even though I'd been in AA for quite a few years, I had no concept really of wanting spiritual growth. It was just I wanted, me to be at peace and for people to like me. I started doing things. I paid a lot of lip service, I think, to this program. I got very involved in service. I had a food plan. And that was probably, I rang people, rang the sponsor, and that was probably about the extent of what I did. And, what happened for me was that I decided that my case was different and that I could do things that other people couldn't do. And I can remember things like going to visit my parents, and my mother couldn't cope with me preparing my own food, so I thought, well, their food's like my food anyway, so I'll just have what they have. And I remember thinking, I can't bothered ringing Miss Spencer and telling her about this pea that I dropped or whatever. I don't need to do that sort of thing. And, you know, I remember at some stage I decided I needed supper, so I just started having, you know, and what I didn't realise with all these things was that what was really happening was that I was giving myself permission to do what I liked. And, you know, I had never, I don't know, that surrender hadn't happened. And I remember my sponsor used to say, you know, that this program is about surrender and it's about being desperate. And I knew I wanted it, but I wasn't desperate. And I thought, I don't know how to make myself desperate. And I look back now and I think, you know, perhaps if I'd been a bit more honest, I might have got a bit more desperate. So, you know, I mean, I'm a very good example of how not to work this program, and it didn't work for me. And, you know, I thought I was working it. And I can remember my sponsor also used to say, you know, we don't get away with anything in this program. I'm very grateful that she apparently hasn't had cause to say that for a while. And it used to make me run cold inside when she say that, because I knew I was being dishonest. And I knew, you know, I was deceiving her, and I was deceiving me, and I was deceiving a lot of other people. And that's how I have lived for a long time in this program, you know, and it's just how it was, you know, it's just what it took for me to, I don't even like using the word surrender because I don't know. I mean, certainly I'm not obsessed with the food and I'm not eating today, and whether that constitutes surrender, I don't know. But it took a lot of years of eating this program to get to the stage of not being able to do that anymore. You know, I was sort of controlling it and trying to keep the lid on it. And I look back and I think how hard that was. I mean, you know, the burden that you carry when you're trying to put the lid on a pack of lies, it's just crazy. And I lived like that for many, many years. And I did, you know, eventually I got to the stage where I just couldn't do it anymore. You know, and I remember my sponsor had said to me, she said, I imagine you're carrying a lot of secrets. And I thought, oh, I better tell her a few secrets. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that was my reaction. That's absolutely what I was like. And I just, you know, a few days later I woke up and I just knew I couldn't do that anymore. And, you know, a lot of people get to that stage when they first come into this program. You know, I've seen people like that the first day they come here, and others who are like that a couple of months later, you know, for whatever reason. It took me a lot of years to get to that stage where I just couldn't live my own lies, and you know, I had to talk about it, and I had to tell her everything I'd done for all those years, and I didn't have a clue what to do about it. I didn't have a clue how to make amends. I just didn't know. And you know, I look back now and I think, thank God I didn't know. I just didn't have a clue in the world what to do about the whole situation. So, you know, I think that was probably, I mean, I had been in that position when I stopped drinking, and the ego had just, you know, I guess the ego and the eating had just taken over again. So, you know, this was a lot of years later, and I feel really grateful now that I did finally reach that situation where I just didn't have a clue what to do, you know, and, you know, I hope that's surrender, I don't know. You know, in some ways I feel as though I've got self-will about other things, but I know I don't now about the food. You know, there's a lot of things I used to do eating, and I look back and I think, you know, I would hate to be doing that now, you know, all that deceit and, you know, I used to call it substitution. you know, I substitute my vegetables for meat and a lot of things like that. I just have double dose of meat instead of vegetables. You know, just heaps of things that I did, and I think, thank God I'm not doing that today. You know, I feel grateful. You know, and when I went to talk to her about what I've been doing, I didn't know. I had no idea what was going to happen next, and you know, that desire to eat was removed. And it had never occurred to me that that was what was going to happen. But it just went. And it hasn't been back since. You know, and, you know, I know what it is today to be free of the food, to not be trying to stop it, to not be trying to change things, to not want something interesting as a variety. You know, I always wanted something interesting, and I used to do a lot of travel, and I used to think, oh, it's great to have a break from the food plan. I mean, I can't imagine thinking like that today. I absolutely cannot imagine thinking like that today. You know, I went overseas a couple of years ago for 6-8 weeks, and you know, I absolutely stuck to my food plan every day, and it was lovely. You know, I mean, I was sort of I wasn't surprised that I would do it, but it was a pleasure to do that, you know, and it would not have occurred to me to do anything else. And, you know, the way it used to be that, you know, that thinking I used to have around the food, I just can't imagine having that thinking today, and I can't imagine how awful it would be to have that thinking today, to want that variety. I mean, you know, I have the fuel that my body needs, and it works for me, and it's been working for me for, you know, for a few years, and I don't need anything else. And, you know, other areas of my life, you know, it's sort of, you know, I'm still me, I'm still an addict, and I so need to be here. You know, I can get absorbed in self, you know, just that anxiety about speaking tonight, you know, it was just all, you know, it's all self, it's all ego, and I am sort of, you know, I can be selfish in so many ways, and certainly self-centred. I'm probably not so much selfish with most people, you know. I've learned to behave well, and I want to, you know, I enjoy giving, I enjoy putting my needs aside and being there for other people, as long as it doesn't interfere with what I want to do. But as far as self-centredness goes, you know, it's there. You know, I'm really clear. I am not cured of addiction. I'm not cured of the desire to eat, but I do have a reprieve. But as far as self-centredness goes, you know, that me first thing is in me. You know, I mean, I live on my own, and the number of tantrums I throw because I can't find something, you know. It's just crazy, you know, and if I hadn't learned good behaviour, I'd probably do it in front of other people as well. I just want things to be there for me, you know. If I want something, I want it to be there. If I want somebody to ring at a certain time, I want them to ring. If I don't want them to ring at that time, I want them to ring at another time, you know. It's just totally, there's, you know, a big part of me that still wants life to suit myself, and that's why I need to be in this program, you know. It's why I need to be here at meetings all the time, because I need a curb on that. And I love coming to meetings and hearing people sharing about how they deal with life, about that petty crap of life that we all have, you know. If I wasn't here, I'd think that self-centeredness was terrible. I mean, I could wish that I wasn't totally self-centered, but I know that it's sort of what a lot of us have. And we come here and we get our medicine, and we you know, I learn through listening to other people how they have dealt with similar problems, and I learn that they have got similar problems, and you know, I learn that there are other ways of reacting to things in life. And you know, I can remember when I was in the disease, you know, I was so bored all the time. I can remember going through a phase when I was about 40 of doing the colouring and enjoying the dots in the kids' newspapers because I was so bored and didn't know what else to do with myself. And, there's a lot to life, I'm involved in quite a lot of stuff in life. And one of the things that fascinates me is that, as well as inside this program, outside the program, I mix with people who have got very similar values to our own. And I used to, I think I was saying this in a meeting the other night, I used to mix with really negative, cynical people. And I don't know whether those people really were like that or whether I just had that effect on them. But I think I am, I don't like being around really negative people today. It's just, it drags you down. And I don't come across those sort of people so much now. And I just know all that sort of stuff is, is because of being in this program and, trying to work this program and trying to live as God would have me live. And, often I don't know what that is. But I sure as hell know what it isn't. If I'm... people talk about the gates getting narrow all the time, and if I'm doing things that aren't what God would have me do, I become very aware of them very quickly, and if I don't, somebody will point them out to me. And it doesn't actually happen all that much now, but when it does, there's that acute awareness, because I believe, because I'm used to living comfortably in this program today, I'm used to not being agitated and upset, or angry and resentful. So when those things do happen, and they do happen sometimes, I'm aware of them and I can do something about them and share about them and whatever else I need to do. And, there's just, there's 12 steps there to use. And, it's just nice not to live that rough, angry, resentful life anymore. I've talked enough, so thank you.